why should it be constituted as it is? 8, why do we so relentlessly empty out and eroticize this child? 9, what role does erotics play in instruction? 10, who benefits by the idiotic mystification central to what we call education? That's a neutral. 11, and finally, what are we doing in this room rather than outside playing? So, I'm finished. Now, I really cannot resist going after some of these, as you know, so I will approach them almost systematically, winding around to issues about pedagogy, the way ideas of education cooperate with dubious, larger cultural models of childhood, and how we might, if we want, reimagine the child, our connection to it, and who it is really needs instructing. Before heading into deep water, the child and surrealism, obliteration, fear, and desire, let's start with familiar territory. Here's our central motif. The child is a confusing thing, figured as a separate species, something wildly different from an adult, and also intimately connected to us, our core, our lost home, and our destination. So much of our muddled thinking, so many cultural problems, and such a great deal of our horrible mistreatment of children, much of it in the name of protecting them, can be traced to this simple idea of definition and distance. Who or what is this child, and how, if at all, am I connected to it? And is it inside me, next door, or not even in the same galaxy? Let's say the child exists for us on multiple levels, some of which we recognize, though we may not want to, and some of which we want to see so badly we cannot allow ourselves to do so. To make matters simple, let's split the child into the conventional empty child and the wild surrealist child. Of course, there are many variations, but hey, we don't have all day. First, the conventional idea of the child. It is common among historians of childhood of a constructivist stamp to assert that childhood is a late 16th century invention, most familiar to us in its later romantic and post-romantic forms, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. At length, the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. Wordsworth's child, the child of the Romantics, is something altogether new historically, not simply different from, but superior to the adult. And we note radically different. Prior to this historical period, little people were probably thought of and seen simply as many incomplete adults, not somehow different at the core. Of course there was childhood, but some scholars argue it was marked not by nature, biology, say puberty, but by the labor market and dependence. As soon as the child entered the workforce, in factories or mines, this was sometimes as early as 5 or 6 years old. As soon as that had happened, it was no longer a child. That is, childhood before the late 18th century was not at all the childhood we take for granted. But what kind of child was this new thing, brought into being by the Romantic movement of the late 18th century? Clearly, Wordsworth's child is not a deficient adult, but a totally coherent being that becomes deficient as it ages. European Romanticism celebrated the child as divine, not the rude beginning of a developing human life, but its apex. Adulthood marked a decline. Now this view shadows us still. This longing for childhood and the child, this sense that everything important is behind us. The Stephen King novella Stand By Me has as its major key the idea that nothing that happens after we're 10 matters very much. And we see this, the idea that kids know best surfacing all over the place, keeping reaching its head into our otherwise serene notions that we are the ones in charge, the ones dishing out knowledge and maturity, and thus upsetting even some, but not many, educational practices. However, we would do well, we teachers, to revisit the old romantic idea, the construction of the very different, well-equipped, visionary child, the one who sees better and knows far more than we. Adam Phillips, the brilliant British, some of you were around for the Adam Phillips thing yesterday, the brilliant British psychoanalyst has developed this view most provocatively, saying such things as, people can learn, but they can't be taught. Or, education teaches the child either to lose interest in what matters most, or to compromise that interest. Or, the child is not fooled by the so-called advantages of development. Or, being a good student amounts to a fear of curiosity. Or, obedience is a fear of interest. Or, the child will learn only what he or she is interested in. Let's listen to Dr. Phillips and see what we can learn. More on this later, but as I was saying, the romantic child proved too difficult to sustain. That is, this notion of the child as clearly superior, divinely inspired, and so forth. That idea proved too difficult to sustain and was drastically altered later in the 19th and throughout the 20th centuries. This romantic child was at first seen as complete, its totality due to active qualities, its determined and fused spirituality. The child's essence, this is the romantic child now, was identified with qualities like innocence and purity. For the Romantics, these innocence and purity were substantive and active agencies. However, as time wore on over the next 200 years, innocence and purity, still cemented in the child, became more and more negative and empty, equated with powerlessness and incompetence. Innocence lost its substance, became no longer an active primal sympathy, but more like ignorance and vacuity. Thus, we figure we need to fill the vacancy with, if all else fails, information conforming to national standards and measurable by testing. Well, I'm not too sure you have that same thing here. I think maybe, certainly in the United States, it's an epidemic. So, this historical transformation that was substantive to a vacant child solved some problems and introduced a host of others, some wonders. In keeping the child distinct and remote from us, inferior now in its post-romantic eyes and in need of education, we clumsily identified childhood essences, innocence and purity, as erotic qualities. Inside patriarchal bourgeois norms, innocence and purity were loaded onto desirable women. The very things a man was to look for in a woman, and patient enough to wait for a proper ceremony, usually marriage, qualities he could enjoy, consume, exploit. That which was prized, innocence, was prized for its allure, its promise of allowing itself to be violated. We are still paying a heavy price for this mix-up, this ambiguous way in which our culture has confused kids and our idea of attractiveness. Notice how starlets and even stars strive to look very, very young, even illegally young. One recent commercial for wrinkle cream has a woman lamenting, "It's not easy to look 15. We maintain a standard for sexual allure that we also declare to be unthinkable, criminal. It is a general, well, I'm arguing this is a general cultural move. This eroticizing of the child is an issue we'll return to, but it's worth noting here that it depends not simply on qualities injected into children, but on distance. This child is an object, empty and remote, subject to a sadistic gaze and not simply erotic, but stationary, without qualities we don't inject into it. Thus, children are susceptible of any figuring we most fancy. They can be lazy louts devoted to idiotic video games or charming and magical beings. the latest criminals, or some Disney cartoon sweets. This child, whether seen as an erotic centerfold, the object of the gaze, or not, is manipulated into being strange and distant. Distant especially in not being us. In our terms, the child is not us most pointedly in not knowing the things it is necessary to know. The child does not know the truth. We do. Adam Phillips said, I gotta keep my love him, sorry. Adam Phillips says truth is a coercive idea used to shut off debate. And that's suggestive for what we envision education to be. We may not define education as a one-way street, as pouring knowledge into empty vessels, because that sounds bad. But all the talk in the world about encouraging exploration, open inquiry, critical thinking, cannot disguise how smug, condescending, coercive, and hierarchical the whole structure is. Notice a secondary use of this empty child to anchor the very dubious idea of the nuclear family, a new invention pretty much in the last few hundred years. The child's powerlessness creates the image of the family as an ecology of protection. The woman nurtures and the man guards, builds a kind of fortress. As is obvious, this model requires a passive woman, a dominant male, moronic children, and a world filled with dangers. Arguably, we populate the world with these dangers and become active defenders against our own concoctions in order to maintain what we need. So, I hope this is clear up to this point. We have inherited a central model of childhood that gives children nothing and a whole lot to us. We pretend it is a heavy responsibility to deal with these know-nothing, more or less embryonic creatures. But we wouldn't know what to do without such a construction, it seems. Let's hope that that is not true, that we can find ways out of a trap that is hurting children badly and not doing a lot for adults either, even if we suppose there are such things as children and adults. I won't dwell on what I've written earlier. Sure I will. Why put that in? Not much of a transition since it's a lie. About the horrors we create for children in schools and outside in the name of protecting their innocence from a set of dangers we are quite busy nurturing. When I use we here in such unflattering ways, as a characterization of an evasive, reckless, selfish culture, I refer, of course, to the United States. In Canada, things are doubtless saner and calmer and more likely. Here, you do not require a steady diet of predator kidnappers, internet stalkers of youth, kiddie porn rings, and such issues to maintain national identity. In any case, I didn't come here to insult you, so I hope you'll take what I say as confined to the United States only. To be clear, that sounds awfully snide, I really don't. What follows briefly traces one consequence of emptying children out, constructing them inside qualities the culture has defined as erotic, and then becoming hysterical at the confusion. What explains the legal attention paid to offenses that either do not exist at all, or that need to be carefully sought out or manufactured? I am interested in how crime is produced or invented around children, more precisely around our dominant idea of the child, an idea so simple-minded and yet so necessary we'll go to any lengths to protect it. What explains such programs as Innocent Images, where FBI agents receive acting lessons so they can go online and imitate teeny boppers, hoping to lure internet predators into meetings and thus into jail? So FBI agents are trained to go online. We spend vast sums of money teaching local cops to sound like cheerleaders, or to sound like predators searching for cheerleaders. Are there internet predators? We are given to believe that they are legion, but the hard evidence is small. Most cases turn out to involve kids and non-custodial parents. Two kids getting together, or sometimes two FBI agents, each playing say someone other than a cop is mad, what are we arresting him for? A crime against a child in which no children are involved. Are we after a fantasy, a thought crime? It is interesting to note how the idea of the child has developed as a stark contrast to that of the adult, marked almost exclusively by sex. Adults are tied to sex. Do it, seek it out, like to be incited by it. Some computer filtering software uses adult as a key term in its blocking code. Kids live on the other side of this great divide. They are the species that has no contact whatsoever with sex. To think of them in the same ballpark is impossible, or rather, criminal. For normal people, we say, there is no connection of any kind between kids and sex. In fact, that's how we define normal. But, and there are lots of buts, it does seem that we are actually obsessed with the connection between kids, sexual allure, sex, and these others, these monsters attracted to kids. Why do we jabber on so about these subjects? What are the features of our Gothic blab about kids and sex and sexual desire? What interest does that blab serve? Why are we so attached to it? What cultural work does it do? And what does it do for us? What can we learn from Calvin Klein and his uncanny ability, his uncanny ability to evoke hysterical responses? I want to consider the uproar a while back over images featured in the Calvin Klein ads appearing on a Times Square billboard in New York City, which had everyone from Oprah to the mayor of New York City taking a stand for virtue and against pedophiles. But the boy models themselves, much less their skivvies, are not my subject. I'm interested in those for whom the ads are designed to induce an impulse to buy, or at least remember a brand name with positive associations. I suspect little boys do not buy their own underpants. It is adults who frequent the shops directed by ads, who, in this case, look and then voice their displeasure, gaze and then howl, and then look again and buy. A public display of boys in underpants is indecent, we say. Worse, it is pornographic. It is, the mayor said, next door to a criminal act, that billboard, inciting the darkest desires of the lowest swine in our culture, the pedophile. Those images, the mayor said, are aimed at pedophiles and will put all children at risk by their wanton encouragement of unspeakable lust. Leaving aside the mayor's dubious market analysis, which suggests that Calvin Klein is knowingly pitching his product to the upscale pedophile buyer, I'm interested in the way in which the mayor's statements are in accord with the public story that, though preposterous, has become commonplace. The mayor is simply reminding us that it is time to haul out, once again, this story we use when we get the chance to talk about kids and sex. The same old story that sadly never gets old. Not only the mayor, but several experts commented in print on this billboard. Quote, once again, Calvin Klein has sexualized children to sell his product. Or, quote, it's purposefully sexual. Interesting. It meant those experts make it sound as if Klein himself had imparted the sexuality to the children. That is, he has implanted in them the ability not to be sexual, but to incite sexual interest in the viewer. That's what these experts mean, right? They don't mean Klein makes the boys interested in sex. They mean he makes us interested in the boys. But how would he do that? If I were selling sheep dip, let's say, is there a way I could make you passionately excited about it? The curious point here is the claim that Klein takes what is not sexual in itself and not capable of arousing sexual appetites in normal people and manages to make it enticing to these very normals. How could that be? He puts boys in $15 underpants on a $3,000 couch and has them bounce. That's enticing. Well, let's say it is. Why shouldn't it be? Underpants are forbidden, we might say, and even the word itself is vaguely indecent. But would Calvin Klein himself in underpants? Or the mayor in expensive briefs? Or evangelical preachers in their tidy whities, bobbing up and down on some furniture incite desire? The controversy occupied call-in shows for days. And I heard every one of them and took notes. That's what scholars do. Many callers refuse to be swept up in the hysteria and claim that after all, boys are not sexy, and anyhow, underpants are just like bathing suits. Now, we don't need Roland Barthes to tell us that glimpsing underpants is not the same thing as glimpsing a bathing suit. That's just dumb. Other call-in guests argued that boys in underpants are nothing to get heated about, but suggested that those Calvin Klein ads were very different from the unerotic images published in, say, Sears catalog or Fruit of the Loom ads. How different? One caller said the Klein ads made very clear the boys' quote, genital contours. Quote, contours like these are airbrushed out of Sears ads and so forth, he said, but they make the Klein ads deliberately provocative, at least to pet fun. I took a look at some of these Sears ads and so forth. Not that one would want to invest a scholarly career in such things, and discovered that general contours were certainly not airbrushed out. I intended to pass among you some examples, but didn't quite know how to explain a collection of such images to customers. This Calvin Klein hilarity provides just one variation on our main Gothic story. The story about children and sexuality, danger and protection, about a population of predators, and about our own immunity from the desires we know very well animate these predators. Calvin Klein ads, and for all we know, the daycare center down the street, the local football coach, most priests and ministers, the family next door, they creep on the internet, virtually everybody but us. We are quite certain about that. We know other people feel that way, but we don't. And we spend a great deal of time devising a mythology, a collection of cultural stories that will assign lust for kids to others and declare ourselves free of it. We might ask then, not simply what stories of child molesting do for us, but what use we make of child molesters. Why have we centered the pedophile, an essential character in the drama of modern life? What would we do without him, or increasingly her? Let me suggest a few things that we might learn from these stories and the way we are handling the problem right now. The way we are handling it right now is to heighten the drama, populate it with monsters and saviors, imagine it's all virtue against vice, and worry about ourselves. The losers are the kids we are setting up to protect. That is, setting up as hollow, vacuous, and incompetent. This foundational story is so deeply contradictory that it needs badly to be repeated steadily and at a shrill pitch. We say that anyone feeling sexual attraction to children is monstrous, of another species, driven by urges we find absolutely incomprehensible. These are vermin who ought to be locked up indefinitely, or better, snuffed out. They are something beyond deviant. They do not twist recognizable sexual urges. They invent new ones completely unknown to the rest of us. And at the same time, we say that this problem is immense. And we keep citing statistics to show that practically every child is molested, and those who think they haven't been simply need to recover the memory. What a bizarre story. Doesn't it occur to us inside this construction that if the problem is of this magnitude, then practically every adult must be in the grips of a lust for children so deep as to override any fear of social censure, humiliation, and draconian legal punishments? How can the sexual attraction to children be both freakish and ubiquitous, unthinkable, and at the heart of our thinking about desire? Why would it ever occur to us to find little boys in their underpants not only obscene, but a public danger? The story we love to tell about kids, danger, and sexuality, about child molesting is, rudely, bluntly Gothic. It divides the world into extremes like a fairy story. Naive Gothic stories do two things for us. They allow us to refocus relentlessly on a topic with the excuse that we are acting for the public good. And they allow us to disavow our obsession with the phenomenon we are fulminating against. We all become cousins of the crusaders against pornography, whose lives are devoted to the very pleasures they imagine they want to extinguish. Child molesting stories are self-righteous porn babble. Our main story is noxious for several reasons, not least because it is designed to maintain the very circumstances it pretends to be acting on. It looks like a crusading story, down with pedophilia, but it is deeply rooted in the conservative desire to maintain the problem that more and more in the United States constitutes a large part of our national identity. In addition, such stories suggest a punitive structure so heavily moralized that we can do little to act except up the voltage, jail more people for longer periods, execute them, tag them for activities less and less directly connected to actual contact with an actual child, looking at photographs, computer-generated images, or cartoons, for instance. We might consider that our fixation on this story of hunting down the pedophiles operates entirely in our interest and doesn't help children at all. The only thing we can do inside the story is protect them. And in order to protect them, we need to fill their world with danger and make sure children are powerless. And why? Because in the United States, of the alarming incidents we tell ourselves of stranger kidnappings, of which there are about 115 per year, says the United States Department of Justice, which given crime rates in all areas is very nearly trivial. Now, 115 per year is of course not trivial for those 115. But are we really spending all this money and directing all this attention because we are looking out for those 115 or because we are looking out for ourselves? We don't even pretend that we are solving the problem. And that is because the problem is doing so much for us. Another terror of this dominant story of protecting is that it diverts resources and attention away from genuinely pressing social issues involving children. 1/2 to 3/4 million runaway kids every year, and about as many throwaways. The very existence of that category is unspeakable. 3/4 of a million. Also, the huge problem of neglect, beating kids, child emotional abuse, inadequate education and health care, the denial of opportunity and hope to children. These are enormities, but we prefer to exercise ourselves over issues that in any version of realism are minuscule. Let me pause for a minute. First of all, child sexual abuse is, in America, a very small part of the pie chart, the abuse pie chart, just above other, and way below emotional abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. And in these latter categories, somewhere between 1,500 and 1,600 children are murdered every year. Within the category of sexual abuse, something like 90% of it or more happens within the home or a narrow circle of family connections. Focusing our attention first on sexual abuse and then stranger abduction allows us to shield the faltering family structure from attention, to titillate ourselves with quasi-pornographic details, and to assume we are doing something for this poor, vulnerable, empty, always under assault child. Perhaps the school can lead the way to new figurines that are designed actually to benefit children. Gray care, lighter stuff now. But there's another child. Remember I said there were two, simplified two. Not vacated and weak, lurking in the background of our culture and our minds. The wild child, the surrealist child, independent, powerful, and self-contained. A child we find worrisome and irresistible, buried in our subconscious but never extinguished. Andre Breton, who fathered it, defined the experience of surrealism this way. The mind which plunges into surrealism relives with burning excitement the best part of childhood. As we make the plunge, we do in fact throw ourselves into the midst of childhood, of a huge universality that exists not in memory at all, but in the now, in the plunge itself. It's not a question of refining or returning, but of refashioning, inventing the child and us as forces in motion, without boundaries and without securities. If we want to play it safe, we'd better cover our heads and retreat into habit, into familiarity, which screens us pretty well. But the secret to new and vital educational possibilities might lie in the direction of the surrealist child. If we move out, we find ourselves paradoxically as child, terrified and assured, at home again and at sea, part of the great oceanic oneness we might as well call death, if that didn't seem to be in such bad taste. But let's go ahead anyhow. Surrealism always being disreputable, coming to parties in wholly improper dress, my shoes, at the wrong time, wrong place. We are children. Surrealist children are about to go on a date with the god Dionysus, which seems something beyond disreputable. Our aspiration will be to find stupidity, a highly underrated capacity and quite difficult to locate. By stupidity, of course, I mean something like the surrealist child, not uninformed, but a cagey and shifty opponent of the informed. In common usage, stupidity is just a word the envious and fearful throw at those bold enough to cast off knowingness. Knowingness comes to us as a protective shield, stands between us and the world, providing ready answers and ready-made perceptions. We need to find ways to keep ourselves stupid and our life a riddle. If that riddle is solved, the price is far too high. We keep generating new explanations because no one explanation is sufficient. We keep reading texts or lives, says Roland Barthes, not to find solid meanings, but they find bliss, open spaces, gaps, pleasure in the openings, where he says, the sweater does not quite meet the skirt. Surrealism, that great friend of the child, managed to turn all this erotic allure reload onto the child and reinvest it in the child, reformulating the child in terms of an anarchic dream energy, an imaginative generating plan. They made the vacancy of the post-romantic child into an activity, partly by turning on the child their ability to live inside oppositions, the idea that children love, unsolved, open conflict, even inside madness. The child calls to us surrealists, defines us by what is lost, and thereby transforms the solid past, our origins, into the free and endlessly plastic present. The surrealist child abides no laws, not even those of nostalgia or hope. The surrealist child is forever, as we might say, on the road, in motion, not going anywhere, though, or coming from any place. The child wanders, is ticketless, and has gotten on no one knows where. The focus on where we started is a patriarchal feudal trick, making it seem that we are centered in our origins, our fathers, an idea so ridiculous it needs to be reinforced daily. What's your name? Who's your daddy? Where do you come from? Origins are bogus, the idea poisonous. On the other hand, a focus on where we're going means giving in before we started, letting timidity get the best of us. Futurism is fear, whether that means getting a diploma, buying insurance, or believing in the afterlife. The future robs the present of any reality, paralyzes us with guilt or hope. What do the surrealists mean by freedom, by dreaming, by embracing contradiction? They mean the child, the molded figure which allows the art of the moment and only for the moment. Surrealist childhood has an affirmative side, the joy available to us when we lose the future and allow the present to live within us. For some, however, the rewards are thin, or the price is too high. Maybe they are right. As the demon Silenus told King Midas, this is all from Nietzsche's The Birth and Transit, this good stuff, who captured the demon and forced him to answer the central question what is the best and most desirable thing for mankind? Silenus responded, miserable, ephemeral, grace. Why force me to speak what would be much more fruitful for you never to hear? The best of all possible things is something entirely outside your grasp. Not to be born, not to be nothing. But the second best thing is to die soon. So maybe those who never take to the road, never live inside the present, reject the surrealist child, have grasped the wisdom of Silenus, better not to be. But not being is not the only alternative offered by our wacky child. There is also ecstasy, intoxication, compassion, art. Almost a century before the surrealists, Walter Pater, starting from similar premises about the absences of assurances, reached childlike conclusions central for our new education. Let's say, Pater says, all things and principles of things are inconstant modes, matters of perception only. It's all, he says, a whirlpool. We are always vanishing, and in the midst of vanishing, strangely and perpetually weaving and unweaving ourselves, reinventing our lives as we go. There's no improving on Pater's shocking, transporting prose, so I'll quote. Every moment, some form grows perfect in hand or face. Some tone on the hills or the sea is choicer than the rest. Some mood of passion or insight or intellectual excitement is irresistibly real and attractive to us for that moment only. Not the fruit of experience, but experience itself is the end. A counted number of pulses only is given to us of a variegated dramatic life. How may we see in them all that is to be seen in them by the finest senses? How shall we pass most swiftly from point to point and be present always at the focus where the greatest number of vital forces unite in their purest energy? To burn always with this hard, gem-like flame, to maintain this essence, is success in life. Thus speaks the surrealist child. Pater then goes on to consider death, citing Rousseau's beautiful passage where he tells of believing himself smitten by a mortal disease and striving to make as much as possible the intervening of the interval by devoting himself to intellectual excitement. We are all, Pater continues, condemned with an uncertain retreat. We have an interval, and then our place knows us no more. Our one chance lies in expanding that interval, in getting as many pulsations as possible into the given time. Of such wisdom, the poetic passion, the desire of beauty, the love of art for its own sake has most. For art comes to you proposing frankly to give nothing but the highest quality to your moments as they pass, and only for those moments' sake. And how would it be if our classrooms were such art studios? Henry Miller, who didn't like surrealism much, said it was the reflection of the death process, that can be seen as a compliment. Breton, after all, said, surrealism will usher you into death, which is a secret society. In what way secret? Only in the sense that we ignore its invitations. It's really open to all, and we'll all check into this club, this hotel, again and again. The association of the surrealist child with death runs very deep, and we know it in our hearts. For this child, death is the only actuality. Both the place from which we came and our destination, all folded into the present. We may not have the courage to face this, but the surrealist child does. To die, says Peter Pan, would be an awfully big adventure. More accurately, is an awfully big adventure. The least welcome of Freud's many unwelcome observations is his realization that there exists in all of us, by way of the surrealist child, a profoundly conservative instinct to find again what we have lost, organic wonders, a sense of oceanic bliss, or obliteration, or nirvana, available to us in what we both shun and yearn for, death. The surrealist child on the road doesn't lead to death exactly. It's not a destination, but a homecoming and an existential experience. It is what we are. The surrealist child both knows and is that death. Death opens up our closed life stories, makes them flexible and subject to constant reinvention. Freud saw a wee child playing a game the child called Fort Dot. Go away, come back. Really, the go away game, and interpreted it, Freud did, as the child leaving Eden deliberately, taking loss into her own hands, going on the road. Okay, so we have many children before us in our culture and in the classroom. Why, we should ask, do we teach? And what child is this we imagine we are teaching? And to what end? To what purpose? Adam Phillips, we recall, says education is a way to murder curiosity, to substitute routine competence for the capacity to keep invention going on forever. Kids ask, and we all know this, why? Not to receive final answers, but to keep the world expanding, always open to questions, never closed and solved. The experience of living, truly living, should never be tested, never graded. Curiosity, that desire and ability to keep the game alive and the questions coming, to turn the world into a producer of possibilities never taking final form. Why don't we teachers reposition ourselves inside this model? But we fall back into testing, standards, suspicion, and imaginative homicide. We call this playing it safe. We might also calling it doing unto others what was done to us. We might call it a cruel act born of resentment, a taming of a wild independence in children we envy so deeply it makes us into educators. Looking out from behind the desk at the child in all its forms, the empty and eroticized child, the wild, surrealist child, can't we think of a different stance to take toward them? And can't we find in our hearts the generosity to avoid turning them into us? I think we can. I think we have all, children and adults alike, kept alive secret parts of ourselves resistant to education. We are protected, even in small cells, what we might as well call interest, or curiosity, or life. If we educators would stop yammering and stop teaching, we would be able to tap into these reservoirs of energy, wild and unpredictable and absolutely resistant to discipline as they surely are. And what a world that would be. Thank you.
Gina, first of all, I want to thank you for a wonderful talk and for making it a great start to Saturday morning. It's 10 o'clock now, and so we won't have time for questions here, but Jim will be here all morning. I know from experience, he's totally approachable. So feel comfortable to ask him questions. We will now go to food and 2:53, a short coffee break and tea. And then there are a few workshops, and when you came in